we are here talking about Chapter 6 of the Primal Wound Book Club series. This is just a podcast where we talk about adoption using our own experiences as adoptees, as well as others in the community. We'll throw in some interviews here and there in between each book club series, so definitely check those out as well. Not going to be a live, video of us on YouTube, but still on all podcast platforms.
Yeah, so we are, as we did in the last chapter, this is now the second section of the Primal Wound, which is kind of dubbed the adoptee handbook. I don't know.
People say Bible.
Adoptee Bible,
yeah.
Adoptee handbook. There's a lot of terms for it, but basically it's just there's a lot in here, so check it out. But we're diving into the second section. Right now we're on Chapter 6, which is titled The Core Issues, Abandonment and Loss. Oh, that already feels heavy. But we are going to talk about this, just like the different sections, which ones stuck out to us. And as you guys have been probably watching and or listening through, obviously we have some that ring true to both of us or just one of us. So it's been a really interesting discussion, just as even we've been working through it. So.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked about this multiple times, but as adoptees, we're very similar, yet so different. Views, upbringings, everything. Whole stories is completely different. Even between us, and we're same orphanage, same, country.
There's a lot of similarities, but I mean, there's, I don't know. I think anybody who knows another adoptee probably feels that way. It's like, well, there's going to be differences, and especially when it comes to upbringing, because being adopted
That's
in
huge.
different families
Yeah.
has a lot to do with it. So this has been a really rewarding element to our podcast, is just going through this book and talking about it. So we're excited to dive into the second chapter of the second section, again, Chapter 6, The Core Issues, Abandonment and Loss. So let's get started.
I think you were the first section.
Yeah, first section for me is the profoundness of loss, which my note here was just amazing lessons to be learned for everyone, not just adoptees, just in general. And I thought this was just, I reread this today, and I don't know, I mean, are you okay? Can I just read this whole paragraph? It's honestly just so, I don't know, I think a lot of people can benefit from this. So first section, the profoundness of loss. Loss itself is not very well understood in our society. We tend to deny its importance on many levels. We get married and celebrate the joy of a new phase of life without ever considering that there may be a loss involved, much less that we might need to mourn that loss. Or a couple has a baby and sends out the happy announcements while neither dares think about the loss of a different kind of relationship, what impact a new family member will have on them, and that grieving might be in order. There is no permission in our society to recognize in each of life's transitions the polarities between gain and loss or joy and sorrow. We are expected to be happy, sing songs, dance jigs, but never to mourn. And I hope everybody that's listening, adoptee or not, part of the adoption triad or not, can think about that, because that was so profound to me. Because I don't think that there's, I mean, I guess in this world in 2021 with everything going on with, I mean, just, I don't know, the climate of everything that we're living in, political climate, or just elements of, being in a pandemic, all of those kinds of things. There's a lot to think about. And I don't think that there's any, I don't know, I don't think there's enough time to just pause and feel. And I think this paragraph overall is something that people should stop and think about. So if you're just listening to this, please think back on this, because I think it's really important for people to consider. So that's kind of just how I wanted to start this chapter.
And I kind of want to just jump in. I didn't have this chapter as a main one for myself, but even the first sentence, or a couple sentences, I guess more wrapped around adoption. I guess I'll start with your paragraph first.
Sure.
Sending out those baby invites, somebody might be really mourning a miscarriage right now.
Exactly. That's a huge thing that I think people are just starting to talk about now, or making more normalized.
It's so common. You know, you might get it in the first try. They might be trying for 3 years. And of course you're excited, you're happy, but just really taking a step back and thinking about others is huge and something we don't do. And I know self-love, self-care is huge in the pandemic, and I totally understand that, but also just considering others on every aspect of that. I guess going back to that first couple sentences that I talked about, it states, if the primal experience for the adopted child is abandonment, then the core issues are loss and the fear of a further abandonment. Neither is acknowledged in most adoptive families, since the abandonment occurred so early in the child's life. That's very interesting to me. We never think about us as a child, especially being an adult adoptee and really diving in and unfolding all of these things. Yes. So I think that was the only part that really stuck out to me, but
which I like the fact that this section is called the profoundness of loss, because we're like, hot take right here. Yeah. Like, it just feels so like
she comes in hot.
She comes in hot
every time. I know. We're always like, we're only on the first page of this chapter, like, woo!
What is with that? It's like hot takes in the first 2 paragraphs, and I love it. So I think this really sets the scene, I guess, for lack of a better term, as far as the chapter. And I guess I wanted to, before continuing, the whole chapter, they talk a lot about like pathology, which I just wanted to give the definition of, because when I was reading it, I was like, I need to focus on the actual meaning of this word and not just the word itself, and just being like, it feels really big and broad and whatever. So they talk a lot about pathology, which I just wrote down. Pathology is the science or study of the origin, nature, and course of diseases, any deviation from a healthy, normal, or efficient condition. First of all, does that make you feel any type of way about this chapter? Because when I looked it up, I was like, oh man.
Yeah. Well, this chapter was already like, I had to take a step back. And I think we'll talk about how we feel in the chapter, but that does, like,
it gives a good perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, I just kind of wanted to give that definition before we dive in, especially if there's, it can be an overwhelming book in general, as far as, especially if it's the first time. So we're hoping to be able to guide people through it and just like talk about these things and have it be helpful, rather than just like talking this, psychological or physiological jargon that just doesn't mean anything to people. So again, that's kind of why I wanted to do that. So
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So I guess moving on to, let's see. What was your next section? Pathologizing of abandonment and loss. But
yeah.
Where is that?
Where's yours?
Pathologizing abandonment and loss.
It's literally the second page.
Where does mine list that, though?
It should be, like, right here.
Oh, that's why. Because I had the definition written in there. I didn't see it. Okay. That's why. I was like, where did I miss this? But
well, I was looking at yours like,
Did you? Yeah, okay.
What the heck? Are we reading the same book?
Anyway. Okay, so the first section for you, pathologizing of abandonment and loss. So that's kind of why I wrote that down. Okay, so why did that stick out to you? What was sticking out there?
There was just a couple. Actually, I highlighted a lot. I didn't even realize I highlighted that much. But pretty much, as the adult adoptee matures, grief goes on unresolved. And you don't think about it because, again, most of the time you are separated as a baby, as an infant. You don't think about that loss that you have endured. And it's also stating how it's difficult, and understandably so, for the adoptive parents to look at the infant and think that he might be suffering. And kind of going back to chapter 5 of where we talked about the adoptive parents, this
1000%.
goes back into that again, where just you're always, and we talked about this before, like there's always that loss and the grieving. And if you don't process that, then you're never like officially okay. Which is very interesting, because I don't think I've ever officially processed my infant grief I didn't even know I had it.
Well, that's the thing. Is like there's a lot to that, and I can't remember if that was just something. Maybe chapter 4 that it may be something we touched on or just talked about us. I don't know, so I'm going to mention it now while we're talking about with grief. Is just that people always talk about, and this is brought up in TV shows especially, I guess just for an example, when parents lose a child is considered the biggest heartache and biggest loss people experience. And that's something that is so not considered, I think, enough in the adoption triad as far as a birth mother losing their child.
Interesting.
Like, yeah. And I don't know it, honestly, with what Erica and I are doing with this podcast. There's a lot of research we're doing outside of these episodes. I don't write everything down, like, so sorry, I guess that I can't, like, connect it to something specific or a conversation or maybe where I read it, but either way, that is something that I remember reading or hearing or something that was saying this is a profound loss.
That's a great...
And it's just, like, a great way to, like, think about it in someone else's shoes. Like, if you are just an adult person that has lost their biological child, think about that and the fact that birth mothers that, you know, relinquish their children at birth or later or whenever, put up their child for adoption at whatever point. That is the same loss. Yeah. And I don't want to say if worse, because it's like, yeah, there's the element of you losing a child that you know so well, or a child that you don't know. There's obviously no better, no worse. That's not anything. But it is the same feeling.
Interesting. And that goes back again to chapter 5. These go really hand in hand of how that triad, everyone feels that type of pain.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like there's a lot to talking about the grief in this, and that's what a lot of this first section goes on to say. Let me see. So, like, page 70, I know, like, you had mentioned the, like, looking at the infant and think that he might be suffering. Like, that is really hard for adoptive parents to understand. Understandably so. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
I don't, unless you've read this book, maybe. I don't know that
you would never think of that.
No, and I don't think that that's necessarily something that you are required, or that's necessarily learned in the process of being an adoptive parent.
Exactly.
The next page for me then, just in that same section, the one thing that stood out to me was stating, if we think of unresolved grief, which you had talked about, the fact that you don't, I mean, who knows what grief you've gotten over or not as an infant, and which is probably doubtful that we have. If we think of unresolved grief as pathological, we should do so only in the sense that it hinders efficiency. The adoptee's emotional reactions to past events are normal and need to be validated. And I want to just, like, give a sigh of relief to that, because it's just like, okay, this is... For me, at least in this early part of this section of this part of the chapter, I was like, okay, keep going. We're fine. We can do it. Let's keep plugging along. Part of the end of that was just saying, like an adoptee had said, even when I'm having fun, there's a shadow inside me, something which keeps me from ever experiencing joy or what I think joy might be. Which, that's something I'll touch on at the end of this. Also, just talking about how this chapter overall made me feel, because that was a really good thing to go back on. But just wanted to touch on that briefly. After this
next section is you.
This is me. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to say you, but this section you related to the post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes. So,
you have some stories too, right?
Oh, let's put these down. Let's just talk. Yeah. So this section of just PTSD, there are, and I didn't really necessarily know a lot of this until recently. And more recently with talking with mental health professionals, it's just become so much more evident as an adult that PTSD rings so true to me as a person, just in the way that my body, like, reacts to things, because this has happened multiple times. Like, I had a trauma in college because of a friend that was going through a hard time, and there was like an attempted suicide, and I don't want to go into the details of it, but it was essentially like after that, certain days of the week were real. Like I couldn't get through a Tuesday.
Days and months and certain dates.
Anniversaries, yes. And I mean that rings true to me. I mean, we've talked about my birthday a billion times. Like I don't do it for a very good reason. My body has a physical reaction to it.
Interesting.
And so that is that is PTSD in itself.
Absolutely.
100%. And I've talked to, like I said, mental health professionals about this and just said, this is something that I deal with and I like can't control it, and it's really bothersome because it's like, what do I do with this? And it's really overwhelming. And more recently, because another thing that we talk about in this chapter, and another thing that I've learned about traumas in general, not necessarily just adoption trauma, just in general, is that people with traumas have terrible memory. My memory's terrible. Granted, part of it I think is just, possible concussion from about a year ago. And so that has, some kind of a contributing factor. But those who have traumas, like, live to forget. And this chapter goes into that.
Try to black it out.
Yeah, so like this chapter especially goes into a lot more of that. But with this particular section about PTSD, and I can't remember which chapter it was specifically, but my mom reminded me of a situation back when I was maybe like 4, something like that. I had mentioned in chapter 5, my dad is responsible for my Taco Bell addiction. So thanks, Dad.
Shout out to you.
Hi, Dad. So back when I was a kid, occasionally we would do like daddy dates or just kind of like running errands, and it would be kind of a day where, like a Saturday, where if my mom was doing stuff at home or whatever, my dad would take either just me or my sister and I just remember us like running errands, getting like Taco Bell and just like doing those kinds of things. And more specifically, and my mom told me this or retold me this story in relation to our adoption conversations that we're now having. So it was very like obvious that it's specific to this.
Which is, sorry to cut you off, but that's absolutely amazing that you're having these conversations now.
Yeah, no,
I love that it's just natural. It's
me
just
too.
there. Oh.
It's really great because it happens just about every time we have an episode come out. My mom tells me we're sitting down and I'm going over for dinner. We wait for something to be cooking, or my dad is doing dishes after dinner, and my mom and her sitting down for a glass of wine, and she's like, so this new episode, I wanted to tell you blah blah blah, and it's just like I love it.
Because I bet she's been wanting to do that too, and it's just when's the right time, how's the right,
it's fueling the conversation.
Absolutely,
I love it so much.
That's awesome.
Hi, Mom. Shout out to apparently my parents for this episode. Sponsored by the Shears. So
we got our first sponsor.
Yes! The Shear family.
I've been waiting for you.
Thank you, guys. Oh my God. So this was just brought up more recently. Apparently what had happened, it's so simple, but so like, oh my God. When it happened, or when she told me again, I was like, wow, that's very telling. When my dad and I and my sister, again, I was probably 4, my sister was maybe 8, maybe I was younger, but I was definitely like under 5. We went to Kmart for like groceries, or not groceries. It was like some errand for like probably a yard or landscaping type of project.
Sure.
And we were in Northfield. There wasn't, Targets or anything. Kmart was, the place. So he took us there, and it was pouring rain, like the kind of pouring rain that's like violent, where you're just kind of like, oh, I may die. Yeah. So it was just like, it was really intense. And it's funny because until my mom told me this, or when she told me this, I had like an actual visual flashback, and I was like, I vividly remember this. Oh my gosh. So it was raining. We had a cart full of stuff. Because my dad was with a, let's say, 4 and 8-year-old, he was like, stay here. And it was between the 2 automatic doors, so it was like this big bay area, like where you can see the car. I was with my older sister. It was fine. It was safe. Like, we were in Northfield. It was no judgment off as far as like my dad's judgment to do that.
Back in those days too.
Yeah, like mid 90s. Yeah, whatever. We were in Northfield. It was fine. He was like, "Stay here. I'll get the car." he went out there, and because it was such a big thunderstorm and it was so dark and it was raining, I immediately just got scared and I burst into tears.
Wow.
And I was not okay. And I was just like, and now looking back on it and thinking about it, being like, wow, I really panicked.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just looking back on that, I was like, wow, that was a trauma response. If I've ever seen one, like,
wow.
Like, that happened. And then another one was when I was 8. And I don't know, this one doesn't necessarily ring exactly true, but it's like, I think my immediate response was due to this. My family, we did a 3-week train trip through the UK when I was 8. My sister was 12. It was great. It was like super fun. My sister got chased down by a peacock in these hedges in a castle in Wales. It was awesome. So I turned a corner and get chased by a peacock, and I was like, what is going on? What is my life right now? But there was a moment where the travel plans somehow kind of fell through or slipped through the cracks in some way. I don't know specifics because I was 8.
Right.
But I just knew my family was stressed about getting a bus. And my mom and I have not recently talked about this, but after this chapter and after the Kmart story, I was like, oh no, this is another one. But I saw this bus. We were about to miss it, but it was apparently the wrong one, and I chased after it.
What?
I was 8 years old. I chased after this bus. And when the bus driver saw an 8-year-old chasing after it, I was like, stop! They opened the door, and they were like, I think my mom cut out to me. I don't know. So mom fill me in. But it was like something where they were just kind of like, this is a bus to blah, blah, blah. And it was just the wrong bus. But I was freaking out.
Wow.
I think that's probably the first time I ever had like a huge, like, I don't know, I guess for lack of a better term, like a panic attack, I suppose. Because I just remember being so worked up and be like, we have to go. Like, oh my gosh, this is now or never. And it was the wrong bus, and it was fine. And it's kind of just like a funny story in my family. Like, hey, do you remember that one time Teresa chased after that bus in the UK?
Oh my god.
And it is like, whatever, it's funny to look back on. But it's just interesting where I was like, I have to save everyone. I'm 8, but I have to save the family. Like, that was just those initial responses. So
interesting.
So like reading this section of it with the, PTSD section, there were some things I underlined, but honestly, like, those are the kinds of things that I just immediately
And I wonder if other adoptees have
for sure
date issues, or not issues, but like date I don't know what the right word would be. Just, if
I want to say date recognition.
Yeah, just come around or those
something
time
feeling off. Which birthdays we've talked.
Yes.
Obviously, that's an episode we've talked about. It's my birthday. I can cry if I want to. It's one of our earliest episodes. It's a really groundbreaking episode for us. So obviously that's one, but I guess I would be interested to know if
for other experiences that they've had,
if that's something that just stuck with you.
Yeah.
That PTSD is just something that, I guess for lack of a better term, comes naturally. You know what I mean?
Because for me, I think I shut off certain things. Like, I don't want to remember that. I mean, if I really dig deep, I can remember it. But
yeah,
I just block those off. I don't want to remember awful experiences.
Which I think is part of what I've learned more just about trauma in general, as far as my memory being terrible. And some of that just also being kind of inconvenient for just random stuff is just like, my memory's terrible overall. And unfortunately, that hasn't really helped me in the way of forgetting traumas, if that makes any sense. Like, it's just like,
wow.
Yeah, my memory just sucks,
Sure.
but it's, as far as the traumas go, it's like, this fades it a little bit. I guess that's all we can do. So.
Because it's so pronounced. It's so.
Yep.
It's traumatizing, obviously. So it's a huge part of your life that you can't let fully go.
Yeah.
Which sucks. Like, come on. Allow me to remember these basic details I don't need to know and get rid of those. Jeez, brain. Come on. Get it together.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that was obviously very interesting to me. That whole section was just, yeah, that was probably the biggest part for me. I guess the rest of the section, I mean, there's a lot that you had mentioned that was...
And there's a lot of sections that I didn't even highlight or underline.
Same.
And I don't know...
Well, your next section, I guess skipping ahead a little bit, was if you leave, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't highlight anything, I think, because it was all like, well, yeah, obviously. But at the same time, I'm curious to think about... Because I do think that you and I have different experiences with this, so... Again, this section being a quotation, if you leave, you're out. I'm very curious to see what your feelings are on this.
So pretty much, I think for me, I care about everybody. I want to make sure everyone's happy. Mm-hmm. And so if you leave, you're out doesn't fully fit with who I am. And pretty much the whole section was talking about how... You know, the trauma of abandonment, if your friends leave or if you have a good relationship, if they leave, you're completely done. You shut the door. You are done with that relationship. In, like, past relationships, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to you. Like, you're nobody to me.
Blocked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally, same though.
Everything. Yeah. I'm changing my number because I don't ever want to hear from you. Like, you're done. It's done. But, like, friendships, I feel like that's a little different for me. I think they wouldn't ever be the same. Mm-hmm. But I'd still want you to kind of be in my life just because I want to, you know, I still care for you. We had a friendship, but it will not be the same. And I think that's because I'm putting my guard up. Mm-hmm. Because you did leave. I think a lot of my friendships either, you outgrow people. I can't go into detail on every single friendship, but you outgrow people.
That happens and that's okay. That's
absolutely
normal. That should be more normalized overall.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's just interesting to me because... She interviewed a lot of people or talked to a lot of different adoptees, and a lot of people said they just shut the door on anyone who leaves because they don't want that abandonment to be an issue again. And it's just interesting to me because I related to Jennifer, a person they interviewed, and she was able to let someone in, but wasn't allowed to have her in her life the same way. So I was just curious more. This is kind of just more like a conversation starter of like how you felt with that. Like, do you notice that with your friendships?
I think what's interesting is the way that you've posed this this section is just saying it's different with romantic relationships because, I mean, I don't know, hot take. I never let anybody in a romantic relationship enough where it's as hurtful when it ends as if a friendship ends.
Very good point.
So it's like...
Very good point. And even as friendships, I think I'm just now being... You know how that one section, I can't remember at this point, but I'm just now fully being myself. I've always been myself, but I'm just now being myself.
Well, and I think, I guess for... I don't know, apologies in advance for bringing this up, but it's like... When you and I had that conversation, when you and I were both dealing with a lot with reading this book, you FaceTimed me and, like, started to cry, and I made you stay on the phone, and you wanted to go. But I was
that's my normal reaction.
I was like, absolutely not. We are talking about this.
I don't like anyone seeing me cry. I would just shut that off. I would not let anyone
you've seen me cry
that.
a million times, so I was like, oh, this is just par for the course. But in that moment, it was like, Erica, no, like, you know we can talk about this because I've talked to you about this. You know we can talk about this.
And I know you're the only one or one of the only ones who can really fully understand exactly where I'm coming from. Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. It's like with stuff like that. And I'm kind of going on like a different element of that where it's like I'm trying to be less... upset with change because that's been like obviously you and I have issues with change.
Ooh, that could be its own
changes.
It could be its own chapter. Ooh.
Yes, seriously.
Or not, because change
is
just not our
okay
thing.
So the chapter would be like, so hot take, change is hard.
Yeah.
We
don't like it.
That would be the end of the chapter or the end of the episode. But I don't know, I think for me it's like I've never had any like romantic relationships know me nearly as well as my friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not nearly.
That one,
at all.
not at all.
I'm like,
not
okay,
at all.
You're out.
Friendships though.
But friendships for me, it's like I always like. And I wonder if this is like. It's probably just an element of romanticizing the friendship and romanticizing the feeling of the friendship, and it's partially being needed and all these kinds of things. So it's like, for me, it's very rarely like a you're out, or like if you
Shut
leave,
the
you're
door.
out.
Yeah.
Whereas that's the case for romantic relationships when it comes to friends who've been through. I mean, I think the shortest friendship that I have, or like the person that I've known the least, like length of time, it's probably like 5 years, and that's a long time. Like out of my friends,
probably me.
I guess, and it's like 3.
It's been only 3 years.
Which it doesn't feel like it's only been 3 years, so that doesn't. I don't get. Like
So
that
that's
doesn't make any
already
sense.
weird. Yeah, like what?
So I guess it's I mean, I guess it's like you just being, quote unquote, only 3 years, but like that's a long time.
I think we just value our friendships very different than a lot of people too. Some people just have friends to have friends.
Yeah.
But like
I don't understand that at all.
We take our friendships pretty seriously.
Yeah.
And I don't have just a lot of people, and I have a small circle who I can call my friends, who are actually my friends, who know, I can go to and things like that.
See, I guess I have a pretty wide, but it's not like one group. It's a lot of one individual person.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we differ in that way.
Sure.
Which I don't, I guess, love or hate. I mean, it's fine either way. It just is what it is. And I like, and I mean, I guess I'm also somebody who loves one-on-one conversations anyway. So it kind of just works out in itself. But,
So that's
a lot more to that section than I expected with the if you leave, you're out.
I got nothing highlighted. Okay.
Yep, same.
Psych.
Let's see. So the next one, fears of abandonment. Nope, that one didn't get me anything. Nope, nothing there.
Honestly, this chapter didn't stick out a ton. I think the last one that I really stuck on or had a couple things was control as a foil to loss.
Which actually, same. I just forgot to write it in our
which is fine.
Doc. But yeah, control as a foil to loss was the last one, or the last one that we both had an element
which
that stuck out to us.
I think totally rings our bell. I mean, it's
100%.
exactly who we are.
Control, like, can we talk about control? Like,
don't like change, like, come on. The first sentence even, one of the ways in which children, and adults too, try to prevent future losses is to try to be in absolute control of every situation.
Which I underlined and wrote, wee! I was like, man, if this ain't me.
Yes.
So, yeah.
But it also talks about how she can never really make up her own mind.
Yes. Which I never want to be the decision maker for stuff. Where it's
right, but you want to be in control. Like, how does that work?
Which makes me really good for,
I'm so glad I'm not alone.
I'm really good for, like, bigger, like, okay, I guess example. When people are like, hey, where do you want to go out to eat? I'm like, wherever you want. I don't want to make a decision.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, we're going to go on a vacation to this place. I'm like, okay, we'll make basically a day-by-day, I quote-unquote itinerary, but not have it be super strict, but enough where I'm like, let's go to these, 5 days. We go to these 5 restaurants. Let's go to these. I'll make reservations at all of them. I will make the hotel arrangements. I don't want anything to be out of my control where something bad happens.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So in conclusion, we will be traveling together. Because clearly
who's going to be making the plans though?
I don't know. Clearly we can either do it. Whereas I just can't be in a group where everybody's like, whatever, we can wing it. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
we can't wing it. We'll die.
Yeah. Okay, question then off this.
Yeah.
Do you get upset if those plans or reservations don't go as planned?
I'm kind of, See, I'm not the kind of traveler where I'm like, if this goes awry, we're screwed because there's obviously other options.
Sure. I immediately get mad. I'm just like, this didn't work out.
It makes me think that I'm like, so will this feel like traveling with my dad? Sorry, Dad! But like...
But you said me and your dad are very similar.
That's not wrong. What's so funny though is, okay, story time. Sorry, Dad, I'm calling you out. But in the times that when we were traveling as a family, it was like, oh gosh, this is really stressful because if something went slightly wrong.
Oh God, that's so
my dad
mean.
would it would make me really stressed because he got really stressed and I was like, no! But when I was working at Disney World, my dad and my mom came at the same time and it was just like my parents' trip. My sister came separately with one of her friends. So it was like totally different trips with everybody. But my parents came I planned all of it. I made their hotel reservations. Obviously, I had the free tickets, so it was fine. It was like everything was set. But I had everything under control, and I've never seen my dad more relaxed when he was traveling, ever. And he was in a freaking amusement park. Like, come on. But it was like, if something went awry, he just didn't know about it. So it was like, I got this. And it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, we could just go look at something else or go do something else. So, like, that's how I travel, where if some...
There's always another option.
There's always another option. I'm never upset about it. I'm like, hey, this means there's a snack break. Like, I'm into it. Like, I think about anywhere that I would want to travel. Honestly, I travel halfway for the food. Like, that's half the reason I travel is for food. So, when that happens, it's like, okay, we can
That's
just
a really good point.
do something else. Like, we can just, take a detour. It's just a detour to me. Yeah. But I do like to have a plan in place. First of all, when traveling is kind of just a good example as far as like
it is
big picture stuff versus little picture stuff, because when it comes to smaller decisions about making people immediately happy, it's like, yeah, I want someone else to choose because I don't care either way, even if I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really care, but you kind of subconsciously
it's funny because I feel like you and I never have this problem because we're both like, if it's like a small decision,
noodles, Chipotle, which one?
Do you want something cheesy? Yes.
Yeah, it's easy.
No questions asked.
That's really interesting. That's something I'm really, really trying to work on because I know it can just ruin an entire day. I don't want to be that person who causes that stress for everyone just because one little thing didn't go as planned.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, it wasn't supposed to happen that way. I need to just let it go. And I think I've gotten a lot better. I hope. I hope, because I'm really trying. But I haven't traveled like on a vacation with somebody in a long time.
Lego.
So I guess.
So if you would like to sponsor Colombian Influence to go on a trip, send us a Benny.
Yes.
That's so interesting. I think for me, again, this section of the chapter, I just wrote "wee" because I was like everything. But the one sentence or the quote that I kind of pulled out from this was, the child was not in control of the situation at the beginning of his life, and look what happened.
Yes. I had
Mic
that.
Drop. I would never drop this. But still, it's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, come on. We have no other way to, like, explain it besides that.
That's exactly what I underlined, too.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so then another quote that you and I had similarly was page 80. Let me see here. Okay, the last paragraph of the entire chapter. Being separated from their birth mothers and handed over to strangers in the adoption process is the only trauma where the victims are expected by the whole of society to be grateful.
That blew my mind when I read that.
Yeah.
Because I know we both know, and we both have had a lot of different types of trauma.
Yeah.
And so with that, it's just like, oh my gosh.
And it's such a simple way to put it, and just be like, they're expected to be grateful. Like, it's kind of laughable thinking about it.
Yes.
Like, okay.
Oh my gosh.
I don't even know.
I know.
And that's how the chapter ends. It's like, can you believe that? I don't know. It's just, it's
just very interesting. I guess overall, as a whole on this chapter, it just made me...
How did it make you feel overall?
It made me feel strange in the beginning because, again, we don't know what happened in our childhood. Mm-hmm. Even pre-teens, toddler age, we don't know exactly how we feel. And I never knew if that was an issue of when I was growing up with my parents, certain things, did I act out because of this, or was that a trauma response? Like, I don't really know. And I can only think about it and try to put the puzzle pieces together now a little bit.
As much as sort of as possible, but I mean, really, how much is? Yeah,
and with the memories and things like that, it really won't ever fully match up, which is so interesting. And so, I don't know. It's just it's a very interesting chapter of how I think we've talked about, do you ever get over the trauma or grief? And now reading this chapter is like, I think I need to really explore that infant section.
And how does that make you feel, just like thinking that you need to?
I don't know. It's just like,
oh gosh. I don't know. I think
it's
when
just
you say that, I'm like,
I think it's just like that'll close it. Like, that's the only part I'm missing.
Whoa! Oh my God. I'm sorry, that's just so like...
That's the only part I'm missing. I know what it was like for teenage years. I know what it was like when I met my birth mom, when I was just coming out of, I was an adult. Like, okay.
Sorry, that was so funny.
They say I'm an adult, but wow, I was still
Legally
still a
you're an
baby.
Yeah, I mean,
18 years old, and now here I am coming out of the fog. I've came out of the fog. I've done this. I've grown as an adult adoptee. We're still growing. We're making this community.
Yeah.
We're connecting with other people. But that infant, toddler age, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So that's kind of how it made me feel. I just had to take a step back, like, and I think that's okay. And I don't think it's going to really change anything for me, especially at this time of my life. But I do want to just close that chapter somehow. What about you?
Oh man, I will say, I guess just so people know, like we notate a lot of this in a Google Doc, and I think I've mentioned this before, just to put our thoughts somewhere so that we're not just saying it on the fly. But it felt so different hearing it than reading it, because it was just like, okay, it just doesn't mean the same. And you said so much more that's so like profound.
And it's funny because I never read yours because I want to be like shocked.
See, I read yours and I'm just kind of like, because I always feel like the last chapter we did, I was like, I related my feelings to what you said.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, I was just like, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying.
But
what you said also is just so much, again, just so much more groundbreaking. And I guess for me, this chapter made me think so much more about the this or that as far as like what ifs. So, for example, if I was a 28-year-old woman living in Colombia, I'd probably have an estranged family. I probably would live in some type of poverty. I don't know. Like, I have no idea, but given what I assume to be just based on the, I don't know, state of their country. And I guess I don't want to assume terrible things, but it's like, there's enough that I know that I can assume that it's like, yeah, I wouldn't be sitting in a studio on a Thursday night talking to one of my best friends about stuff and like having it be produced and like being a podcast, just like I'm going kind of off on a tangent, but I would be in a very different situation if X, Y, and Z hadn't happened. But so like I wonder what my mental health or my any of that kind of thing, what levels those would be at had I not experienced that initial trauma of being abandoned.
We've touched on this a couple times, and
yeah, so it's just like, if I didn't have that, if I didn't have the constant need for approval and the constant need to be perfect or any of those things, obviously, like, I know, like, the elements caused by staying in a family that's, for lack of a better term, broken or whatever, not, I guess just like broken in some way or estranged or whatever. Obviously, I know that and poverty are things that cause the same kind of like, or can cause mental instability or mental illness or any of those kinds of things. But it's like, would that be something that I would be able to deal with better than the current stuff that I'm dealing with? As far as like now, I feel like I've been given this really great, productive, silver platter life that I just get to pick and choose, like, what do you want to do? Like, what college do you want to go to? What, like, in high school, it was like, what sports do you want to do? What extracurriculars do you want to do? Which of these do you want to do? You want to do an AP class for music theory? Like, you can, it's like, I feel the need, or I guess, like, subconsciously, and I'm just kind of realizing this now with doing work with my therapist and stuff, I feel the need to take every single opportunity I've been given and be the absolute best that I can, which doesn't necessarily go back to, like, I'm not really a competitive person whatsoever. Like, that's not really something that I get.
I am too competitive sometimes.
That's so funny because whenever people are, I don't know, I mean, you see the true side of people when they play Monopoly, and I'm always just kind of like, man, it's funny, it's hilarious. But that's at least my belief, is that you see the true side of people when they play Monopoly. But I just don't really necessarily think that I'm competitive in those kinds of ways. Like, I know what I'm good at and I like it, but it's like, I do believe in things happening for a reason, so it's whatever. But it's more so being validated that I deserve this life. So
wow.
I just, when I read this chapter and just like I think it was in the very beginning of the chapter. I can't remember which section specifically. But there was, he was talking about pathology with abandonment and loss, maybe. I think it was actually the second section that made me think this, and I wrote this, how do you feel about this section right away, because I was like, this is how I feel right away. Oh my gosh, like, this is it. Which, going back to everything else, it just makes sense.
Validated that I deserve this life.
It's like, I feel the need to continue to earn it.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's really interesting, because I think as far as what this chapter specifically was saying and the things that we were writing down wasn't as much the ones that stuck out to me. It was more so like the overarching like feeling of it.
Yeah.
Was very like, nope, this is it. This is how I feel about this chapter, because it's like,
yes,
all right, this is how I feel in my life, and this is a really good way to define it and talk about it. And
I love that side. Very opposite than, like, I love how we can read the same thing, have the same experience in a sense, and yet both of these are completely different. But yet, both, like, I think I could see that. I understand that.
Yeah. One, because I get, exactly what you're saying is, like, understanding the element of what you went through as a infant or a toddler or child, any of those kinds of things that we weren't, like, having to be conscious of at that time. And I don't think really our adoptive parents were necessarily. And it's not like adoptive parents are forced to go through therapy for the entirety of their child's life.
And again, a lot of, like, for our adoptive parents, there's no resources like this.
No.
They had to just do it how they thought was best.
It's kind of like, once you do it, it's like, all right, you're on your own. And I mean, I guess I don't know 100% if that was the case, but also at the same time, I feel like by this point, hey, Mom and Dad, if like, if this would have been something, or if they would have had something like that, I feel like I probably would have known by now. But because it's not something like where they do a check-in every year.
No,
you know what I mean?
I don't, and I don't think there was.
And I don't think there was now either.
Literally, the resources and everything has blown up in the last, I'd say, 5 years.
Oh, well, and
even
I mean,
in the last
totally has
2.
to do with just like technology, social media, all that kind of stuff. And
which
like,
is amazing.
Yeah, and I think podcasts are so accessible to people because it's, and I guess just going on a tangent, it's like podcasts, I just love that they are not so overstimulating in the way that general media consumerism can be, as far as it being like having to be stimulating. It's like, it is just a conversation, and I love that, getting down to the bare bones of just conversation, especially with something like this. And I love every single like type of, I guess, other, people like us that are doing these kinds of projects and making sure that this conversation is being had, and if we're just reaching the Midwest and others are reaching different parts of the States or, around the world, it's like, okay, at least we can reach the people in our areas, and we can make sure that this is getting talked about, especially as adult adoptees, because as we mentioned before, it's like, we're not thought of, in this, like, that's not a conversation where it's like, hey, how are they doing,
Exactly.
So, I love it. Let's see, besides that,
I guess we just have our 2 closing questions open for discussion at all points. The first one, I'll just kick it off here. Do you have a hard time letting friends back in your life after they have left? Do you shut the door on that person and never let them back in? Or are you like Risa and I, where it's a little different? You will let them in. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, I guess we touched on relationships. What about relationships? Is that different than your friendships, how it was for us? Or is it always you shut the door, or is it always you let them back in? Mm-hmm. Love to hear your kind of thoughts on that, how you felt during that discussion that we were talking about.
Yep.
Spill the tea.
The second question being, how did the fear of abandonment affect your life? Were you always consciously aware of it? I don't even know what else to say.
That's the question.
That's the question. How did the fear of abandonment affect your life? Were you always consciously aware of it?
Obviously, we weren't always consciously aware of it.
And I don't think many
Again,
people
that goes back to me being an infant, where I feel like, of course, I think that was the hardest part. Mm-hmm. And no one knew. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know. Yeah. Well, maybe I did. I don't know. It blows my mind. Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's...
So?
Chapter 6 is crazy. It's a doozy.
But it was a good one. It definitely opened our eyes to different scenarios. Again, regarding adoption, it's not just... These aren't the chapters where it's like validating on certain points where you read it.
It's very thought-provoking.
Yes.
Just totally thought-provoking as far as all the elements, not just how we feel. Mm-hmm. Which is important. Really good. Because, we really do want to make sure that other parts of either the triad or just people that know us understand it. So,
absolutely.
That's great.
Well, you can find us on all social medias at Colombian Influence. Make sure to follow us, like and subscribe our YouTube channel. Make sure to get your copy of the Primal Wound.
Yes, go to our website, colombianinfluence.com. Go to resources, and you can go to our bookshop. Basically, that will sponsor local bookstores as well as us, so to help provide funds so that we can continue this content. So be sure to do that. Comment on our discussion questions or really anything from there.
Yeah, reach out to us if you ever have any questions or just want to chat with somebody who is an adoptee.
Or if there's a topic that we haven't covered yet.
Yes. Or if you know someone who wants to be interviewed. We are continually just trying to reach out to the community as much as we can. So we truly appreciate all your support and love and messages that we get from you daily.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Later.
Bye.
That was a long one.